Now, before we were discussing topic coverage, how in-depth an article was, based on the amount of information you can get from it. This is closely related to the type of source it is. There are three types of sources. There's primary sources, which is the actual documents and artifacts of the time period. Newspapers, images, even studies, historical artifacts, art pieces. So those are primary materials. There is also secondary or scholarly research based on primary materials. This is the analysis of primary resources. Example would be an author reviews the primary research of others through a literature review. This is closely tied to, in the last piece, the second degree of breadth in research, breadth in topic coverage. It's not quite as deep as primary research, but it is deep. The third would be tertiary material, which is a review, a very distant review of the material, of secondhand summaries or analysis. So on the one hand, someone conducts a study, a secondary or scholarly research would analyze that study, and tertiary, someone would review all the literature and research done on a subject. So it's sort of like, if you compare it to a crime, someone would witness a crime and talk to somebody else, or let's say a reporter would come in and talk to everybody that had witnessed a crime, and then that person would talk to a third-hand person, which is tertiary. Tertiary means third, and that person would review to other people what happened. Of course, if you think of authenticity and the authority of what you're hearing, obviously the more distant you get from the actual source, the less credible the report is. So obviously primary is what you should go after, primary and secondary. Another reason to go after primary and secondary or scholarly is that it provides more evidence and detail for your essay. Example from the social sciences. ACTA survey. I forget exactly what ACTA means at this point, but it's a conservative group. They surveyed undergraduates to test the extent of political bias in the nation's schools. And just take a look at what it looks like here. They'll probably have what the acronym stands for on the website too. ACTA, Intellectual Diversity, American Council of Trustees and Alumni, Washington, D.C. And the survey is at the very end of the article. This is the survey here. Questions to students at schools, such as, on my campus, some panel discussions and presentations on political issues seem totally one-sided, and they answered the questions. Now, ACTA's survey has been criticized later as being biased and not scholarly. And the particular group that did that was, let's see if I can bring this back up, was I counted as secondary or scholarly, which means that they analyzed the ACTA survey. This was the Free Exchange Group, which was made up, yes, of, who do you think? More liberal scholars. So their findings are also questionable, but can be checked on, and I have done that for a research project of my own. This is the Free Exchange on Campus. And their report is called The Faculty Bias Study, Science or Propaganda. In this report, higher education policy researcher Dr. John Lee examines 8 studies that have been put forward as social science research to allege that faculty are politically biased. Lee demonstrates that none of these reports meet minimum criteria for valid social science research. So that would be an example of a secondary or scholarly work. It's still based on the primary findings, so it analyzes and presents a lot of detail based on the primary research. An example of tertiary material in which you get third-hand accounts. This is a news report on the free exchange critique. You will find less detail in these kinds of sources. You will not find the methods of the research or study specifics. You will only find general summary and review of the material. A literature review is an example of that. And this is biasing and bias studies. I don't even know if there's an author listed. Excuse me. It's too far down to look anyway. And this is Inside Higher Education. It is a reputable source, of course, but all you're going to get is a summary. The various studies analyzed are by no means identical, but they tend to have two major themes. That faculty members are liberal and that their liberal inclinations are significant in considering their performance. And then it reports on the free exchange, which criticized that. And that would be an example of tertiary. Another example are literature reviews. This is a review of student evaluations of faculty at colleges. And I've shown you previously how often the reviews will have in parentheses a bunch of authors and before it the summary of what they found. It will not include any kind of methods of their research, any details about the findings except general statements. This particular literature, the reason I got this one in particular was because there's a review of academic freedom. And instead of the parentheses, this source has the citations. Some argue that student evaluation forms are a threat to academic freedom, and then they have the citation. And at the end you can see it's Haskell, who was mentioned earlier, up in this citation bibliography. So that would be an example of tertiary as well. Because I was a medieval major, I also have on this chart some examples from medieval history. The primary material would be a chronicler of the Middle Ages named Jean Froissart, who wrote a book called A Chronicle of the 100 Years' War from 1337 to 1453. He was actually there. He reported back his experiences in the war, and I believe he was an actual knight, and he participated in the combat. And he also served both under the French and the English. An example of a secondary or scholarly research is Barbara Tuchman, a scholar who read and analyzed Froissart and many other chroniclers to write her own book, A Distant Mirror. And that book uses primary research as a basis for her book and her detail. A tertiary material would be an encyclopedia entry on Froissart, a Wikipedia entry, or a literature review of scholarship on Froissart. I don't know if we actually have to look at this, but I thought it'd be interesting. The Gentile example, thematic parallels in Froissart's Chroniques and Chaucer's Franklin's Tale. And there would be a literature review on all scholarship related to that. Of course, literature reviews are usually just part of a source, but sometimes you will see just a complete literature review. What you want to look for is probably something like primary research combined with literature review. Of course, all this depends on your professor as well. So with primary research, yes, you should use it. It provides first-hand evidence and proves your case. Secondary research or scholarship, yes, you should use it. It provides analysis and detail on first-hand evidence. For tertiary, no, you should probably avoid it. It provides for further research only. In other words, follow the trail of references in the material and try and find the material at your library. And the cons of primary is it could be false or inaccurate. I mean, even Froissart, the medieval chronicler, was often biased in his historical accounts because he was serving one government or another. And that's just one example. Acta Survey, of course, has been criticized for being biased as well in terms of conservative criticizing liberal teachers. Scholarship or secondary sources can also reflect bias, and you need to research it further to confirm the source a lot of the time. Tertiary material, it's shallow, it lacks detail, and skims the surface, so it would be the one to avoid the most, except for to find further sources. And that concludes primary versus secondary research.